When my neighbor knocked on my door and asked, "Can you help me with my zip?" I thought it was just about a dress. But the moment my fingers brushed against her back, I realized it was about something far deeper. It was one of those evenings where nothing felt urgent. I had been sitting in my apartment, a book in my hands, though I wasn't really reading. The hum of the fridge was the loudest sound in the room, and outside, the corridor lights flickered softly, as they always did in our old building. That's when I heard it, 3 gentle knocks at my door. Not hurried, not demanding. Just tentative. Curious enough to draw me up from my chair. When I opened the door, there she was, my neighbor, standing in the dim glow of the hallway light. She was 43, though age didn't cling to her the way it clings to some. Graceful was the word that came to mind, graceful, but with something flustered in the way her hand fiddled with the strap of her dress. She smiled, almost sheepishly, as if she were about to admit something trivial yet strangely personal. "Sorry to bother you," she said, her voice low, carrying the soft lilt of hesitation. "But could you help me with my zip?" For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard her right. My eyes flicked to the dress she wore, navy, fitted neatly to her shape, the zipper running from the small of her back up to her shoulder blades. She turned slightly, brushing her hair to the side to show the half-fastened zip, the fabric loose just enough to make her predicament believable. It was such a simple request, and yet it didn't feel simple at all. I hesitated, caught between politeness and the sudden awareness of how close I would need to be. Sure," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. She stepped just half a pace nearer, enough that her perfume, something subtle and warm, like jasmine after rain, reached me. I lifted my hand unsure, my fingers hovering an inch from the zipper as though the air itself carried weight. The hallway was quiet except for the faint buzz of the overhead light. My heartbeat, on the other hand, seemed far too loud in my own ears. The first touch was nothing, just the cool feel of the metal zipper between my fingers. But as I began to draw it upward, my knuckles brushed against the soft warmth of her back. She stilled, only slightly, like a breath had caught in her chest. My hand moved carefully, deliberately, as if any sudden motion might break the spell of the moment. The sound of the zipper sliding upward was louder than I expected, the rasp of teeth interlocking filling the silence between us. When I reached the top, I let my hand fall quickly to my side, uncertain if holding it there any longer might say more than I intended. She turned her head, just enough to glance at me over her shoulder. Her smile was small, almost playful, but her eyes carried something steadier, something unspoken. "Thank you," she said softly. And just like that, the hallway felt smaller, warmer, as if the space between us had shifted into something neither of us had planned. For a second after she thanked me, I thought the moment was over. Just a simple favor between neighbors. But something about the silence that lingered in that narrow hallway told me otherwise. She hadn't stepped away yet, and I hadn't moved back. The zipper was closed now, neat and seamless, yet the memory of my hand moving along her back seemed to hang between us. I told myself it was nothing, just fabric, just a gesture, but the way my skin tingled where it had brushed against hers betrayed me. She turned her head slightly, just enough for her hair to fall in a soft wave against her shoulder. In the dim light, the loose strands caught a faint glow, brushing my cheek when she shifted. It was such a small thing, but it made my chest tighten, as if the world had suddenly shrunk down to this moment, the warmth of her presence, the quiet hum of the corridor, the shallow pull of my own breath. I realized my hand was still hovering close to her back, fingers just an inch away, as though reluctant to retreat. I pulled it back quickly, but the hesitation hadn't gone unnoticed. She glanced over her shoulder again, her eyes finding mine for the briefest instant. It wasn't a long look, it didn't need to be. There was a spark there, something curious and testing, as if she were asking a question without words. I swallowed hard, trying to bring some normalcy to my voice. "There you go," I said lightly, though the steadiness of my tone didn't match the uneven rhythm of my heart. She let out a small breath, one I realized she might have been holding all along. It wasn't a sigh of relief, exactly. more like an exhale that released tension she hadn't wanted to show. The sound was soft, almost lost to the quiet of the hallway, but to me it felt louder than the zipper itself. The air between us shifted. She reached up, gathering her hair back with one hand, securing it with a clip. The movement tilted her body just slightly, close enough that the bare skin of her shoulder brushed my sleeve. It was barely a touch, fleeting, but I felt it as if it had settled deep into my chest. When she faced me again, the expression on her face was calm, casual, but her eyes gave her away. They held a trace of something vulnerable, a flicker that made me wonder if asking for help with her dress had been about more than the zipper. "Thanks again," she said, her lips curling into a smile that was polite but not impersonal. It lingered a fraction longer than it needed to. I nodded, but I couldn't help stealing another glance at her, at the way the dress now sat perfectly in place, at the poise she carried so naturally. She seemed untouchable, and yet, in this quiet pause, I felt as though she had let me glimpse something fragile. As she reached for her purse and prepared to step inside, she paused, turning back just once more. Her eyes caught mine, steady this time, and for a heartbeat longer than was comfortable, either of us looked away. And then, just as quickly as it began, the moment was gone, leaving me standing in the hall, my hand still tingling from where it had brushed against her back. I thought she might close the door then, leaving me in the hallway with nothing but the echo of the moment we'd shared. But instead she lingered, her hand resting lightly on the doorknob. There was a pause, a thoughtful hesitation, before she spoke again. "You've been kind," she said, her voice softer now, almost hesitant. "Would you like to come in? Just for a glass of wine, as thanks." Her words surprised me, though not because of the invitation itself. It was the way she said it. Not casual, not careless. There was something measured about it, as though she wasn't only offering wine but also a glimpse into her private world. I hesitated, not out of reluctance but out of the sudden awareness that stepping inside might mean more than it appeared. But then I saw the slight curve of her smile, the expectant warmth in her eyes, and I found myself nodding. "Sure," I said. "I'd like that." She stepped aside, holding the door open. I walked past her into the apartment, and immediately the atmosphere shifted. Compared to the dim, cool corridor, her home felt like stepping into another kind of evening entirely, soft, warm, lived in. The scent of jasmine still lingered faintly in the air, but now it mingled with something homier, the faint trace of vanilla from a candle burning low on the table. Her living room was softly lit, with lamps that gave off a golden glow, leaving no harsh shadows. It was a space that reflected her, elegant, yes, but personal too. Books stacked on a side table. Framed photographs of places that looked both distant and meaningful. A silk scarf draped casually over the arm of the couch. "Make yourself comfortable," she said, slipping off her heels near the door. The sight of her moving barefoot across the rug added an intimacy to the moment, like I was seeing a version of her no one outside these walls ever did. I sat at the edge of her couch while she moved gracefully into the kitchen, returning with 2 glasses of wine. She handed one to me, her fingers brushing lightly against mine as she did. The glass was cool, her touch warm, and the contrast lingered even after she pulled her hand away. We clinked glasses, and she sank into the chair opposite me, curling her legs slightly beneath her. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes studied me with a quiet attentiveness. "So," she began, her tone lighter now, "I imagine this isn't how you thought your evening would go." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Not exactly. But I can't say I mind." She smiled, and it wasn't the polite kind she'd given in the hallway. It was fuller, freer. The kind of smile that felt like an opening door. Our conversation started small, about the building, about the noisy pipes, about how the elevator always seemed to rattle like it might give out. But slowly, like water finding its way into deeper channels, our words carried us into places less ordinary. She told me about the city when she first moved here, the people she once knew, the nights she'd spent awake, restless and wondering if she'd chosen right. I listened, not just to the words but to the way her voice softened when she spoke about things that mattered. And as I sat there, glass in hand, I realized something. The zipper, the dress, the hallway, that had been the surface. But here, in the soft light of her living room, I was being invited to see the layers underneath. The conversation carried on as the night thinned around us. What had started with laughter and light anecdotes drifted, almost without warning, into quieter places. She leaned back in her chair, her glass resting against her knee, and her voice lowered as if she were letting me in on something fragile. "You know," she said after a pause, "people don't look at me the same way they used to." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the bookshelf in the corner, avoiding mine. "At work, at parties, even just walking into a room, it's like I've crossed some invisible line. Suddenly, you're not seen as someone at your peak anymore. You're on the other side of it." Her words hung there, heavy but unforced. I wanted to protest, to say she was wrong, but I stopped myself. This wasn't about me correcting her. It was about her being brave enough to say it aloud. I set my glass down, leaning forward slightly. "I don't think that's true," I said softly. "Not from where I'm sitting." Her lips curved, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's kind of you. But you're young. You don't see what they see." The honesty in her voice pulled something loose in me. I hadn't expected to confess anything tonight, but her openness made it impossible not to. "I feel it too," I admitted. "Different, of course. But being 25, people treat me like I'm still figuring things out. Like I don't have the right to want more, or to be taken seriously yet. Sometimes I feel invisible in my own way." That caught her attention. Her head tilted, her gaze returning to mine with a spark of surprise. "Invisible," she repeated, tasting the word as though it belonged to her as much as it did to me. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, but it was charged. The kind of silence where two people realize they've stepped onto the same unspoken ground. I could feel my hand twitch slightly against my knee, aching to bridge the space between us, to close the distance with something, anything. A touch. A word. But I didn't move. And she didn't either. Instead, we sat there, suspended in that quiet pull. The clock on the wall ticked softly, every second loud in the hush. Her breathing was steady but slower now, as if she were weighing something carefully inside herself. Her eyes softened when they lingered on me again. Vulnerability shimmered there, so different from the confident smile she usually wore when passing me in the hallway. For a fleeting second, I thought she might say something more. Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. That small restraint, that decision not to cross the line, was its own kind of intimacy. It was the recognition of tension, acknowledged but unspoken, and it left the air thick enough to touch. I wanted to reach out. To tell her she wasn't invisible. To show her. But hesitation held me still. And in that moment, I realized she was fighting the same battle. The silence stretched between us, but it wasn't empty. It was thick with all the things we weren't saying, charged with questions we were both too careful to voice. She was the first to move, not away, but across the room. Rising gracefully from her chair, she carried her glass toward a framed photograph on the wall. "I never could get this one straight," she said lightly, her tone deliberately casual. She lifted the frame, adjusting it with a practiced hand, though I had the feeling she wasn't really concerned with how it hung. I rose too, almost without thinking, as though the pull of her movement was something magnetic. My steps brought me beside her, close enough that I could see the fine lines near her eyes, the subtle glow of her skin in the lamplight. When I reached up to help steady the frame, my shoulder brushed against hers. Neither of us pulled back. The contact was small, simple, but it carried a weight that made my chest tighten. I became aware of how near we stood, the faint heat of her body radiating through the thin barrier of fabric, the way her perfume seemed stronger here, like it belonged only to this moment. She didn't move the frame again. Instead, she let her hand linger on the edge of it, her fingers still against the wood though her attention had shifted entirely to me. Her profile was soft in the golden light, her lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't distance either. "You make me feel lighter," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned to look at her, caught off guard by the vulnerability in her tone. Lighter? I echoed, my voice low, careful, as though speaking too loudly might break the spell. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine then, steady and searching. Yes. Like I'm not carrying it all alone for once. Her confession was quiet, but it hit me with the weight of something profound. My instinct was to respond, to reassure her, but words felt clumsy against the delicacy of what she had just given me. Instead, I let the silence hold it, standing there shoulder to shoulder, the nearness saying more than my voice ever could. She shifted slightly, just enough that her arm brushed mine, deliberate this time. My breath caught, though I kept my composure. I wanted to reach for her hand, to let her know I was right there, but hesitation clung to me still. It was too soon, too sharp a step. Her gaze softened, as if she knew the war inside me, and her smile finally surfaced, gentle, tinged with something unspoken. The kind of smile that wasn't for politeness or charm, but for truth. And for the first time that night, I understood her words from earlier. Helping her with her zip hadn't been about the dress at all. It had been about this, about testing whether someone might see her, stand beside her, and not look away. The photograph on the wall stayed crooked. Neither of us cared anymore. Our attention had shifted, turned inward, locked on something heavier, something trembling between us. Her hand drifted down from the frame and hovered near her side, brushing against mine as though by accident. But when she didn't move away, when her fingers lingered within reach of mine, I knew it wasn't an accident at all. I looked at her then, really looked at her, not as just my neighbor, not as the woman in the navy dress I'd zipped up an hour ago, but as someone standing on the edge of honesty, summoning the courage to step across. Her lips parted, then closed, as if she were weighing the cost of letting her guard down. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and almost trembling. "It wasn't just about the dress," she said. "When I knocked on your door tonight, it wasn't only because I needed help with the zip." The words hung in the air, raw and unpolished. I felt my breath catch, but I stayed still, giving her space to go on. Her eyes flicked briefly to mine, then dropped, as though she feared what she might see there. "I think I just wanted to be noticed. Wanted to know if someone might still see me." Her voice cracked on the last words, barely audible. "Not as someone fading, but as someone who still matters." It was the kind of confession that didn't ask for pity, but for truth. I set my glass down on the nearest table and stepped closer, careful not to crowd her but close enough that my voice carried only to her. "You don't have to wonder about that," I said softly. "I saw you long before tonight. More than you realize." Her eyes lifted slowly, disbelief and hope wrestling in their depths. "You're more radiant," I went on, my throat tight, "than anyone else I know. And not because of a dress or the way you look tonight. It's you. The way you walk into a room. The way you carry things no one else notices. I've always seen it." For a moment neither of us moved. The air was thick with the weight of what had been spoken, yet strangely lighter too, like we'd both been holding a breath for too long and were finally letting it go. Her hand shifted then, deliberate this time, resting gently on top of mine. Her fingers were warm, steadying, tracing over my knuckles in a slow, almost hesitant motion. I let my hand turn, allowing her touch to settle fully against mine. My skin buzzed where she pressed, but it wasn't just the physical warmth, it was the grounding, the reassurance, the silent answer to everything she had just confessed. Our eyes locked, and in that shared silence, something passed between us that didn't need words. Vulnerability. Recognition. A fragile kind of relief. For the first time that night, neither of us looked away. Her hand stayed on mine longer than I expected, long enough that I felt the steadiness of her touch begin to settle into me. For so much of the evening, there had been a trembling tension between us, nervous, electric, uncertain. But in that moment, it softened into something calmer. A kind of peace. She let out a breath, the smallest smile forming on her lips. "I don't even know what this means yet," she admitted, her voice low, careful, but honest. "I just know that I don't want to feel invisible anymore. And tonight with you, I didn't." I squeezed her hand lightly, an unspoken reassurance. We don't have to know what it means right now, I said. We can just let it be what it is. One step at a time. Her eyes softened, relief flickering across her face. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't overwhelming, it was quiet, like the easing of a knot that had been tied too tightly for too long. For a while, neither of us moved. We just stood there, close enough that her warmth reached me, our hands still joined between us. The clock ticked faintly on the wall, but the sound only made the stillness feel more intimate. Eventually, she drew her hand back, though not quickly, not as if she regretted it, more like she was laying something down gently rather than shutting it away. She glanced toward the door, then back at me, her smile small but genuine. You should probably get going, she said softly. It's late. I nodded, though part of me wanted to stay. But she was right. The night had already given us more than either of us expected. Pushing further would risk breaking the fragile balance we had found. She walked with me to the door, barefoot still, the soft sound of her steps following me across the rug. When we reached it, she stopped just before opening it, turning to me with an expression that was lighter now, less guarded. Thank you, she said. But it wasn't the polite thank you from the hallway. This one was heavier, richer. Her voice carried the weight of everything that had passed between us. Not just for the zip, but for seeing me. I swallowed, the words catching in my throat. Always, I managed, and I meant it. For a brief moment, her hand lifted again, resting gently on my arm. The pressure was soft, lingering, enough to send warmth through me that would stay long after I left. She didn't say anything else, and she didn't need to. That touch was her promise. Then, with a faint smile, she opened the door. The cool air of the hallway rushed in, a stark contrast to the warmth of her apartment. I stepped out slowly, turning once more to meet her eyes. The door closed behind me with a quiet click. But it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the start of something fragile, something worth protecting. And as I walked back to my own apartment, I knew one thing for certain. Tonight hadn't been about a dress at all. It had been about being seen, and about what happens when two people, against all odds, finally allow themselves to.